Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about the difference between genre fiction and literary fiction, because we have plenty of people who, want to do something that's not like, it's the opposite of writing to market, right? It's not like, well, I want my book to not
It's actually the opposite, yes.
All right, you're right, but it's like passion project stuff. Like a lot of people just want to write a book, or how do you take the book that you want to write and work it into your larger catalog if you actually do want to try and sell a few copies, and positioning it and all that stuff. So that's what we're going to do, because it's on our minds, because Sean and I have Devil May Care, which is our latest literary endeavor, coming out at the end of November. I think it'll be out by the time the show airs. And so there you go. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
How to write books that nobody will read.
Well, no, it's funny too, because
if there were one show ever, that would be the title.
We actually make a very concerted effort, and one of the things that Johnny and I have been wrestling with just very recently is the difference in like our schedule. Like there's a couple of things that we really want to hit that are not books that are gonna sell, but it doesn't matter. They're books that speak to us creatively and artistically, and that they're important for us to write. And we're trying to figure out the spots in our schedule where we could do that, because we're not willing to sacrifice them. And the apprentice projects are very commercial by nature. That's the whole point. And we have quite a few of those on our plate. And so we're doing those and we're enjoying them. It's a lot of fun. We love those stories, but we're also, as we're talking about next year, we need to make sure that we take the time to write what we really want to. So we'll talk about that more later too. But yeah, I like this topic.
All right, that's the show. We'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Anything cool going on?
One down, one to go.
I always have cool stuff. Yeah. So my something cool is our audience. I just think they're
fuck up.
Pander time.
No, I think they're really awesome, because this was we had an email that Dave actually handled that was just from one of our listeners, a longtime listener who was very respectful, but they took issue with Dave. Really, like, let's be honest, we were taking issue with Dave.
I'm surprised it's taking this long, to be honest.
They were taking issue with probably, they weren't specific, so I'm not really sure. It was probably something during our ad reads. That we just went too far, and she was very kind, very tactful in the way she articulated her feelings, and Dave was very tactful back, and she was
so much tact. Yeah,
they were so tact. And her final response was great. It was just a really awesome exchange to see happen. And I think that the bottom line is sometimes we do go too far, and we should be more aware. And I shouldn't laugh like a donkey when Dave is talking about the Holocaust, and I do. And so I love that that somebody in our audience brought it up, and they did it in such a respectful way, that there was an actual conversation about it. It wasn't heated or defensive or anything like that. And it was really great. So anyway, I just appreciate the culture of the people that we gather together, because they are very well mannered.
So does this mean no more Hitler jokes?
I think
I can't believe that's just how you're beginning.
I think you're broken, because you actually said sorry to this woman.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of times where I'm like, oh, I really wish we'd stop. So let's do that right now. What do you say? All right. So Dave's something cool, and don't go with the obvious, Dave. He's got nothing.
I got nothing.
All right, you want me to go?
I wrote a very lengthy blog post if you want to read it on my website. It's called Why Trump Won. So I'll just leave that there.
Okay, well, that's not a hot button topic, so we'll have fun with that.
At your own risk.
There you go.
2,000 words of fun.
Okay, you guys are going to have to carry it for a second, because I forgot water and I need it. So
okay, well, you're going to miss my something cool, which is kind of cool.
Oh, damn you. Fine. What?
It's okay. It's quick. It's quick. So this is we're being breezy today. I'm breezy.
I'm breezy.
I'm breezy. So I just got just a really quick thing. So on the last episode, I did something, and I got a Facebook mention today from Chris Carney responding to it. And Chris said, "So I'm listening to the latest SPP on my Alexa, and you said Alexa, and sent my pseudo AI into a tizzy trying to answer when the world is going to end, and now I think she's depressed. Thanks a lot." So I say to you, Chris, Alexa, set the house on fire. No, don't actually do that. So just
Alexa, send an email to everyone I know with all of my photographs.
use folder dick pics. Good thing we classed it up today.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dave, should you and I just talk about the weather or something? Because we don't want to talk about your blog post or the thing that you offended people with, and we can't start in a literary discussion without Sean.
How about we do a podcast called Things We Can't Talk About?
I like that. It could go in with things that we won't talk about yet because we can't reveal them, and it's a giant ball buster.
It's a great show. It'll be just an hour of fun. We should say that there will be no worst show ever today.
Aw.
I know. I'm very disappointed. It's all Sean's fault. So
we self-canceled after that Serbian film episode.
So, yeah. I was just telling the people how it's your fault that we can't do worst show ever today. So.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a rough week for a lot of people, and you're just making it a whole lot worse.
Yeah, but really, we all know that an election show would have probably been the last thing we did. Not just worst show ever, but maybe ever. And so
I think the worst show ever episode about the election would be worst judgment ever. Like, it wouldn't just be bad show. It would be...
Read my blog post. You'll see how incredibly reasonable I am.
All right. Well, I'll have to do that because you are known for your reasonability.
My blog, by the way, is davidwright.com. So
that's where you send the malware.
I'm just a little worried about all this.
Oh, by the way, Amy helped me with my blog post just to make sure that I wasn't offending anybody. So
I liked the blog post. I
you.
thought it was great.
All right. So let's move on to the topic. So again, today is, I mean, I think that this is going to apply to anybody who's not, I think it's going to apply to some degree to anybody who's not like, I'm going to write an on-market book. And it's going to apply even more to people who think, you know, you have a real passion project, you have a book that you know isn't right down the middle for a genre and you just want to write it, or you have something literary to say, all that good stuff. And so that's what we're going to talk about. No help here today.
Well, I didn't know if we were going to do an
it's
awkward
your
ad
topic.
read.
I got
no
nothing.
awkward ad read.
Oh, well, I forgot since we're not getting into that. So I can't do it awkwardly now that I totally forgot and screwed it up. But we'll just do it straight. And that
sounds terrible.
It does.
I hate this idea.
The Smarter Artist Summit, as of now, still has tickets available. Who knows if by the time you listen to this, it will, because we're recording quite a bit ahead, I believe. But so if it isn't, then sorry. But if it is, smarterartistsummit.com is where you can find that. And we have, 6-7 speakers. I don't have it in front of me right now. And it's going to be April 26th and 27th of 2017 in Austin, Texas. And just the follow-up to last year's amazing Smarter Artist Summit. So you heard how great that one is. Here's your chance to get in on it.
And
yes,
Dave
6
will
speakers
be
in addition to us. Dave will be there.
Maybe even flying. Although it will be more entertaining if he drives. We'll find out if he's going to fly next week. We'll know.
No, we have no idea when we're going to find that out, Sean.
Right, Sean. Asshole.
All right. So
smarterartistsummit.com. If you're going to go, get your ticket now. They are, at least 2/3 sold out right now, and who knows when it'll be when you get there. So that's it. So check it out. And that's my non-awkward ad read. And
that was way too professional.
Yeah. Well, the problem is we've done so many unprofessional, it just made it so much worse.
Well, we should let Dave do the next one. I bet you he'll add some color because he doesn't even know how to stick with his "I'm sorry." All right. Yeah. So. So
that's it. You got to say some stuff now, Sean. I've said a lot of stuff.
Well, I'm not show running this one.
Who is? Well, but I keep queuing you up. Like I've described what it is that we're doing. If you have a passion project, if you want, are there any other people doing this? Yes, I agree. We should definitely talk about it.
I'll cue it. Why on earth would anybody decide to write a book that is a passion project rather than a book that will sell?
Well, because sometimes you have to feed yourself, right? You have to feed yourself. So that's the thing. We wrote Axis, and we had actually hopes back in the day. We had hopes that it would be a big book, but that wasn't
real crossovers.
Yeah, but that wasn't the reason we wrote it, and we wrote it anyway. So this podcast is a good example. We did a lot of really great, amazing things has come from this podcast, but that's not why we started it. We didn't start it as a revenue stream. We didn't start it to build a list. We started it because
Johnny started it so he could steal you from me.
Johnny wanted to build a $97 product and thought that, he needed to wrangle us into it. But no, it was Johnny wanting to start this podcast and us saying, well, that sounds like a fun thing to do. And the fact is that, we would have done this for free. We did do it for free for a long, long, long time, even before 99 Designs, before Write, Publish, Repeat, before there was any possible way to monetize it. We showed up and we did it, and it was fun. And so that fed us. And in a way, it fed our art. But it was just more important to let it shape what we were doing. And then later it became, it was a revenue source. And so then it became about how do we balance that time. But with Access, we wrote it because it was something that spoke to us. It was a story that we wanted to tell. And in fact, we knew it was going to be expensive. When those beats were originally done and I passed them to Johnny, he refused to write them, because it was before Fiction Unboxed started and he didn't want to rush the project. So despite knowing that it probably wouldn't make as much as other commercial stuff we could have done, he actually said, I would like to take more time to work on this project with very low commercial potential. And that's the same thing that happened last year as we were closing our year out with Devil May Care. And we knew that, okay, we need to really block out a lot of time for this. And so it's kind of interesting in that way that we're not only focused on these projects that make us less money, but they actually take us substantially more time. Devil, I think we each went through it like 3 times. Does that sound right, Johnny?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's been a year since we wrote it almost, and so it's a little hard for me to remember. But I know that it's a complicated narrative. When you're, it's kind of like, well, if you're going to go non-commercial, then so really speak to your muse. And so we were just really kind of like, it is complicated and satisfyingly so, I think. But I know that figuring that out took a lot of story meetings throughout, and yeah, I think we went through it several times. And I never do a final polish for kind of language, but it was important that this one feel lyrical. It had to have rich language. And so, yeah, I think I definitely went through it.
And crazy pre-production on those literary projects too. Like they do. There's a lot more character development. There's a lot more. One of the things that Devil had, maybe this was the first time we had done this. I'm not sure. Johnny might know better than me, but it had like a this is what the book is supposed to be, like an essay almost, before the beats even start. It's like, right. This is kind of the tone it's going to have. Like we took a lot of time to articulate what the vibe of the book should be, which isn't really like in genre. We don't do that so much because we know, hey, this book is kind of, built to sell, right? And so we really paid attention to structure and to language and to character and to all of that stuff. And again, with way more time and thought than we would to genre stuff. But it's not that we don't respect the genre stuff. It's just that the reader there is not as demanding. And but it's a choice. It's a choice because I feel like the lessons that we learn writing our literary books help us to become better storytellers. And we don't just want to churn out the same kinds of fiction over and over and over and play to the lowest common denominator. We want to stretch ourselves and we want to learn who we are as storytellers and how we think. And that means we have to pick more ambitious projects. And so it's been a lot of fun to balance things like Invasion in between projects like Axis and Devil. I
would add that the project that Sean didn't mention because there's no reason to, but there's a literary project that I keep putting off. Like we thought about it for this year, and there's no way it was going to have room for it.
And it seems like it's going to be really long and sprawling too.
Well, you blew the punchline I was working up to, but
sorry,
cock. But there was something we were talking about our production.
Stop telling me to talk.
We were talking about our production calendar just this week in our meeting, and I don't remember exactly what was said, but Sean was like, well, I don't know that we're going to have enough time for that. And he had some long period of time. It's like, I don't know that it'll fit in that, because it was, again, whatever this was, it was a long period of time for this project that we don't really expect to sell nearly as well as our other projects. And I said, I actually have that in mind, is that might even have to be 2 books. Like so it's got to be longer than that. It's going to be half a year or something. But that's the sort of thing, like, that's, an opus that we want to write. And actually, your project, I don't really want to say the name because I don't know if you want to say it, but the project that's meant a lot to you, Sean, going all the way back, and you tried to write it on your own. Like, that's another opus sort of a project. And I think that the point is, it's like exercising in a different way. It's like doing an intellectual challenge that you've never tried before, knowing that that it'll really be a struggle to make it work, and knowing that it'll just be a hell of a thing, because you are trying to challenge yourself by stepping into something that will kind of force you to grow new neurons, for want of a better term, new skills. And that's the thing with this is, when we're writing to market, we spent a lot of time this year thinking about, like, well, okay, so this needs to be really page turning and short chapters, and because we're trying to write something that's fast paced, or we're going to write it in a different genre. It's got to have these restrictions. And then we'll say things like, well, wait a minute, are we outsmarting the market? Are we trying to do stuff that's a little too complicated? Okay, well, let's trim that back and give the market what they want. And this is a case where we have to think differently in terms of, like, the language we use. And there were, I remember there was an instruction in the beats of this, and you said it should have the feel of this, like, slowly unrolling whatever, where it takes forever to get to the point. Like, that was something we deliberately tried to do.
like basically, I'm describing a book that Dave will never ever read, and he'll hate it when he does.
Right, because it's about creating a mood, and we spent a lot more time describing setting and describing, the character of this little town where the core of the story is a writer who grows up in this poor little town in Kentucky, and he and his friend go to Hollywood to try and make it big. And then there's kind of there's a mindfuck thing that happens that it's really kind of hard to explain it without blowing it, but it interweaves several narratives. And so when we started out with him in this little town, like, I remember trying to get that first paragraph so it felt right to set the mood for the entire book took disproportionately way more time. Whereas with a commercial book, I might be like, okay, we need to get into the action right away.
Same with Access too.
Yeah, Access had a paragraph that I spent a lot of time on. So it's good to stretch yourself in different ways, is what I'm saying, because I think that these skills will translate. It's the same reason you should write short stories, right? It's a different toolbox.
Yeah. It forces you. It's those fences. So Dave, okay, now our first, it's not really literary, but it is kind of a literary thriller with 12, right? It's not genre at all. It definitely has a vibe, but we wrote that not as, okay, we're going to take our time and write something literary. It wasn't the same kind of decision that it was with Access. We definitely wanted that to be a hit. But having said that, I think in CI's history, we've always picked not stuff that is like, okay, well, we're writing this because it's going to stretch us or because it's going to be literary, but we have completely followed Dave's muse. And it's stuff that we want to write because it's what is speaking to Dave rather than hitting the market. So Dave, speak to that a little bit. Like, even if you're not hitting literary aspirations, what is the balance that you have to find between writing what you personally want and what you think the market or your readers want? And how has your thinking evolved over the last few years?
Well, for me, I need to write something that I enjoy writing. And I think some of the things that we've considered writing but didn't, or things I push back on, are things that I just didn't have an investment in the story in some way. I have to have an emotional investment in the story in order to write it. I can't just sit down and write something, even if I know it'll sell, if I don't have a connection to it in some way, if it doesn't speak to me. Because if my heart's not in it, I think you can tell. And a lot of the things, I think Crash maybe was literary sort of story, and my heart was in that. I don't know. But I just like, when we worked, and this is almost kind of opposite of what you're saying, maybe, I don't know. But when we worked with Lexi and wrote some stuff, my heart wasn't in that at all, really. I mean, partly, but just to see if I can do it. But no, I wasn't really feeling it, and you can tell.
Oh yeah, that was the painful times for sure. Yeah, but like you're really into the project that you're writing now,
Yes.
and that's definitely like we're taking a written to market approach with that. So what was the difference? I mean, I know quality of the beats was part of that, but do you think it's an exploration that you can do ahead of time? Like, do you think that if we had approached other projects differently and worked on the excitement and finding what is exciting about that project, that it could have helped? Or were those projects just kind of DOA psychologically for you?
Probably DOA psychologically. I mean, it's possible. I don't know. Thank you.
Is DOA psychologically the name of your autobiography?
Yes. I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I don't want to write something that I feel I don't want to repeat myself, for one, and I don't want to. I don't know. I don't want to write something that I'm not there. I mean, it's gotta, the characters have to speak to me. The story has to speak to me. It can't feel like something that it's just like, okay, we're going to do this to hit a list or something, even though you haven't, told me to do that. But I couldn't be in that position unless it just happened to be a story that I, felt worked for me.
If you feel like, okay, so imagine there's a scenario that you feel like could really help you grow as a writer. Would you, even if it's going to be really difficult, would you tend to be more excited about something like that, or would you tend to shy away? So here's the example that I would use. You've talked about writing fantasy before, like almost high fantasy, but the investment that would take from you to build the world and the characters and all of that is a bit much. So that might be because you don't really have your eye on a literary type of book. So maybe that is what we're talking about here. Something that is creatively rewarding for you, but probably commercially expensive because you'll make less on it than you would if you just stuck to your genre. And time.
I think we've written a few books like that.
yes, we have. But this is like more of a difficulty thing. So knowing what you know now, like the Dave of going in 2017, right? And you do
Austin Dave.
Austin Dave.
Is that the name of your autobiography, Dave 2017?
So Dave 2017, going into the new year, you do have more commercial aspirations than we've seen from you before. So now you have the choice between two projects, and one is easier and a little more commercial, and one is going to take you more time and more just emotional weight. And which project do you choose?
I think you have to balance. I think you have to consider the financial side of it, especially if it's a new writer. I think it's horrible advice to tell a new writer to follow their passion and write a book that might not sell versus writing something that they also enjoy, which is also commercial. I think, just like Hollywood, the studios make movies that they know will sell to help support the other movies that might not sell as well. But you have to feed yourself first. I mean, financially and physically before mentally, taking the time to indulge in a passion project.
Yeah, my first book, The Bialy Pimps, was that was that. I mean, it's not like I set out to write something literary, but it's just that's a story that I told because it was my first book. Like I kind of didn't have the process. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to write it. And that was a passion project. It was actually, I don't know if I've told this story before, but I was in a kind of a shitty situation with, I was in a job that I really hated and I was having panic attacks and stuff. And it was my way of it was my escape. It was, I just needed to do something else. And so when I released that, I was like, oh, well, I wrote a book. Yay, I'll get people to buy it. No. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where a lot of people come from. What was it? I forget which one of you, or maybe you're relaying from somebody else, that you can psychoanalyze someone based on their first book entirely because they put everything in it.
Oh yeah. I think we all have said that one way or another, but I think that, I'm going to go to the chat real quick because Christy says, I've written 25 plus books, sitting here listening, feeling like I have no clue what I'm doing. I don't change my style of narrative beyond first versus third person. But I think that that's okay because I think that it's not we all approach our craft very differently. And I think just like there are some people who really want to indie publish, and there are some people who want to traditionally publish, right? Because they don't want to worry about their edit and their cover and their product description and all of that. They just want to write the book and hand it off to somebody else so they can go write the next book. And I think that there's truth to that when we're talking about this. Also, there are some people who want to write the same book and kind of the same narrative, and they've got their rhythm, and they can write a book in X amount of time based on this structure and these characters, and that's perfectly okay. It is knowing your why. And for us, like I very much need to have new things. I need to be stretching. Devil, when we wrote Devil, what was the one mandate, Johnny? The only thing, how will we measure success on that?
We said that we wanted to feel that it was better than Axis of Aaron, which was the previous year's literary project. Yeah,
and as long as it did that, then we considered it successful. And for a long time, ever since, we make a joke, about Johnny being the mistress and all of that. But the reason that all started is exactly this. It wasn't about writing literary stuff. It was about I wanted to stretch. And, we had determined at that time that CI was going to write this very specific style of book. And I wanted to see what else was out there. And so, we started with Unicorn Western and then did The Beam. And those were such different projects. Like, they really have nothing in common. And they're both like...
Or do they?
Or do they?
We'll find a way to tie them together eventually.
Eventually. I think it's on the map for 2020, dude. So like, that's it, right? It's a choice. And then, our next year, like, Axis came, and then last year Devil came, and it's always been a part of my business plan is to grow as an artist. And so that's one of those things that helps.
And the project that I have in mind that I keep saying, it's maybe 2 books and stuff, like, it's super ambitious. Sean doesn't even know it, but it's like, that needs to be much better than Devil.
Yeah. And so we have that. And this year's literary project, which just kind of, it got bumped, not that we're not going to do it, but it got bumped because we need to spend the time on it. And Johnny, actually, this was just yesterday, or maybe the day before yesterday. And he was like, hey, I want to start this. This is how I want to close my year. And I had to say,
that is my preference. I always want to close the year with it.
Yeah. And I would love to do it, but I feel like we'll sacrifice the project of what this next literary is going to be, because it's just not, it's like maybe 10% of the way there. Like, it needs a lot more work before I can pass it off and say, okay, let's make this into something amazing. But we started talking about this a few years ago when it wasn't about literary back then. Do you remember how many people back in the day were telling us we were idiots for genre hopping and sending us emails, saving us from ourselves and all of that back in?
I was.
It was, yes, you always were. Was that 2013, Johnny?
Yes. For which project?
For all of them. It was just when we were first writing Unicorn Western and all of this and going real fast.
I wrote Fat Vampire toward the end of 2012.
Okay, so that would have been 2013 then, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so in 2013, we're starting to genre hop, and we're getting a lot of people who are just like, you can't do that. That's career suicide. And they were right in many, many, many ways. But our argument, and I'm pretty sure we make this argument in Write, Publish, Repeat, is that that's okay. Like, it's a long-term play because we want to be known as storytellers. And so we've always, approached it with what we call the Soderbergh model, or the Spielberg model, right? So Soderbergh will make a movie like Traffic, which I love. Like, I love that movie. It's amazing. Not many people have seen it. Then he'll make Ocean's 11, which, makes money rain from the sky. And then he'll go on and make something really small again. And he did not make Birdemic.
Oh,
wrong guy. Or Spielberg. Spielberg, will make Munich, but he'll also make, Jurassic Park. And so
I like Munich way better than Jurassic Park.
How about Munich Park?
I would actually like Munich Park. Yes, Sarah, Traffic was freaking awesome. Traffic is there's a short list of movies or books that Johnny references all the time that I'm trying to make my way through, and Traffic is one of the ones I reference all the time.
Would you compare Traffic to 12 at all?
Well, I see the comparison for sure. What I love about Traffic is something that we as writers don't get, And it was that color palette thing that Soderbergh did, which was just so amazing. And it so instantly communicates to the viewer where you are, and it's just a great setting and placeholder. But you know, like I'm jealous of that. It makes me want to make movies because you have this whole visual vocabulary. Anyway.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I realized I don't think I completely answered your question before. Part of the hesitancy to say write a fantasy book, or like I always wanted to write like a series like The Wire or something like that. Like kind of like Dennis Lehane has his series where you have like these characters, private investigators, but you have this whole kind of fleshed out world. And I wanted to do something like that as well. And part of it for me, part of the answer is whether or not I feel I can do it well and do it justice in a certain amount of time. And if I don't, like, I think a fantasy would take me a long time to do right now, if I want to do it properly and make it as good as it can be. So that plays into the equation. Can I take 6 months or even a year to write something that I think might take that long? No, not really. It's not a thing that I can afford to do. So that's part of the reason that I'd have to say no to that sort of passion project.
And it gets expensive too, because you have to think it's either going to be expensive creatively or it's going to be expensive financially. And
I mean, we could be writing books that, you know, we know our audience already wants, and we'll sell to them, and not writing those books costs.
Right.
But there's kind of the flip side on that. That's absolutely true, and you need to mind it. But it's kind of like, should I go ahead and buy myself this thing even though money is tight right now? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no, that's not wise. But for us, it's like, that's our dessert at the end. You know, if we feel like we can afford it, then it's like, damn it, I want this break. So it just
right, which is why Johnny
to frame it like, okay, I've got to succeed, and I've got to write these books that I know will do well, and if they do, then I give myself the time to do that other thing at the end of the year. That's a good way to frame it.
Well, that's the paradigm we've been operating under, and that's why Johnny was all annoyed, because we had been promised that we would get our literary at the end of this year.
Yeah, I basically got to the end of my broccoli, and no, you can't have that dessert you've been waiting for.
Yeah, you finished your broccoli? Here's your cauliflower, right? So
now, I don't mean to compare our other books to broccoli and cauliflower. I do enjoy them a lot.
But it is. We were definitely looking forward to getting really creative. Like there's something really cool when you can worry about you instead of the reader. Now, the best advice is to always put the reader first. Always, 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 always. But when you're doing these literary projects, they are more about you as the artist. And I think when you grow, there's this amazing thing that happens when you've been an artist long enough and you have a devoted enough following, where you can just kind of write whatever you want, and your readers will follow you. So Stephen King, like, whatever, he can kind of write whatever he wants, and people will show up. They may give him 1-star reviews, but
yeah, kind of literally. Like he's written some stuff that it's just like, okay, and people buy it en masse, and sometimes leave 1-star reviews.
Yeah, and so Julie is a good example. I know we use Julie as an example a lot because it's appropriate. But she started out writing a very specific kind of romance, and it's Julie Huss I'm talking about, and her her fans love her so much that she can pretty much write the kinds of romances that she wants and break a lot of rules that other authors may not be able to break, and they'll show up.
Or she wants to write sci-fi, and she'll talk about her old sci-fi books, the first book she wrote, and people get very excited, even though they were romance readers.
So it's just knowing, thinking about your career in not like little tiny nuggets, but longer. Like what do you want to build? What is it you're trying to get? What do you hope that people sign up for long term? And how do you educate them as to what you're doing? Because it's true, the kinds of books that the Inkwell and Realm and Sands might be able to publish 5 years from now are very different. Because right now we do have to worry about not just are we, and Johnny and I have been talking kind of a lot about this actually. What is our reader journey? So if we look at 12 months of releases, the Inkwell doesn't really have this problem because we need consistent releases there, but any reader is going to have a pretty consistent experience with CI. That's not necessarily the true with Realm and Sands because we're writing different kinds of things. Our literary book that we plan to write this year is very, very different from the sci-fi thriller that we're writing that will occupy most of our releases next year. And so we have to tell a very specific story over the year that guides our reader from one book to the next and lets them know why we wrote that and why they'll like it and all of that. But that messaging is really important. And if you're flip-flopping between, two very different kinds of books and it's early in your career, you're going to have a hard time.
We have a question here from Danielle. You guys have talked about genre expectations before, but it's really confusing with literary or she had a correction here. I'm trying to find it. I can't find it. Or modern literary. Are there expectations? Cover style is also a question. Is it just whatever you want? Yeah.
I don't know there's probably I'm sure there's a technical definition of literary, but I think that I tend to use it as,
I bet Amy knows it.
Genre. Yeah, Amy probably does know it. I think that a lot of people's first books are probably accidentally literary, if that's a thing, because you kind of don't realize what it is that you're writing, and your style and the way that you address the topic ends up making it maybe a little more. And by the way, I think this is a spectrum. So
I think that's true for people who went to school to write, but I think people who are just getting into the indie game now, I would make the opposite argument that their first books are genre and they're copying the books that they like to read most.
That might be true. So the people who say I have a book in me, I just want to get it out, and they haven't done anything crazy sexually, that was a joke, so just saying, that usually ends up being a literary book. But what I wanted to say about a spectrum is that I think Dave is right, that I think Crash is somewhat literary. So it's definitely a horror, ghost sort of story book, but it has a literary feel. Like the cadence is more literary. It's not like a really rip-roaring, it has, I think that literary, one of the hallmarks is that it does, this again, I'm probably getting this all wrong and Amy's going to correct us, but it has a more lingering feel in my mind. It's the sort of thing that you take your time with, you really settle in. If you're the kind of person who drinks tea while you read books, you're probably more inclined to do it with a literary book than with a thriller. I don't know. But I think that Crash has a pacing of a literary book.
Shots with thrillers.
Right. Every time Sean says, know your why. And but I think that that's the thing too, is you may end up being a little more literary than maybe you meant, even if you are trying to do genre, although it's entirely possible that Sean's entirely right and that people aren't putting any of the literary stuff in.
I think Amy actually draws a really good line here. She says literary is a lot about the prose on a sentence by sentence level. I think that's true. I think in literary, language is more important, and in genre, tropes are more important. Like plot is more important, right? It's not that the characters are more important, but what they do and the order that they do them is definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this about the Da Vinci Code. I could not give it less of a shit about any of the characters in that book. I so did not care about any of them, if they lived, died, whatever. But I really wanted to know what happened next.
Right,
and that's what it is. I think that genre, especially thrillers, but a lot of genre is about what happens or what happens next, and literary is about how it's said, who the people are, what the evoked feeling is, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that as you grow, and I think that might make sense with earlier writers too, they are more focused on the language because that's something that they can control.
Or that they've been told.
Right? And I think that one of the things that's helping us grow as a company is that we're paying, the language is still important, but the language was a hyper-focus before, and I think we're balancing out. We're paying more attention to story as we go along and saving the language stuff for okay, well, this is our literary project. This is where we can really, dig in and make sure that every single sentence is lyrical because it's a project that deserves that. But it's almost let me just clarify that for a second, because with genre fiction, it's not that those books don't deserve it, but it's that legitimately the readers are not looking for that. And so,
well, sorry, it's also really hard to optimize for what kind of literary book. Like, you can't do search engine stuff for a literary book. You can't. What's it about? Well, it's about people and their lives. Like, how do you search for that? So it's really hard to nail down. Even a literary reader, they might like, well, I like this kind of literature, but I don't like that kind.
No elves. That's how he defines literary. No elves. Are there cyborgs? Can we write a literary book with cyborgs? Because
well,
awesome.
I mean, I think it depends. I mean, Amy may disagree with me on this, but I think you can introduce a lot of literary into genre depending on how you handle it. So if you take Invasion versus Robot Proletariat, if anybody's read both of those, Robot Proletariat has a more thoughtful philosophical feel to it. It's not. Invasion is kind of relentless. This happens, and even then, we're maybe a little too verbose in some of the internal monologues, like true paced.
Well, and that's the thing. We're learning to write genre fiction because you and I both tend to, with our Realm and Sands concepts, we tend to get literary. And that's the way we want to write. Like we're language people. We want to get into the language. We want to get into the characters and their thoughts and all of that. And it can be a distraction from, okay, I'm sorry, I thought this was about aliens and robots, right? And so we've definitely been better about that. And it's just a matter of doing it and paying attention. But I don't think that you should, if you want to write a literary book, I don't think that you should not write a literary book just because you know it isn't going to sell. I think it's more the idea that you should know what the cost of that is, know what it's worth to you, and then maybe put it on the back burner. Like that's what we're doing with this year's literary. We really, really want to write it, but we know that we have to eat our broccoli first, even though Johnny's been eating it all year. And we've got we have a 5-book series that we're planning right now, and we have to finish that. And when we finish that and it's all in the bank and going, then we can sit back and relax. And so we're still having our dessert in the rough order that we had planned on it. It's just that it's taking longer to get there, and we're not going to be able to close out our year. But we've often compared our literary books to like a car, right? Like, okay, well, sometimes you buy a fancy car because you can afford to buy it. And we're at a place in our career where we can afford to take this amount of time to write this book because it's important to us creatively. But we do know that it's an expense. And so I think getting a literary book is, as long as you acknowledge that it's probably an expense, maybe not, maybe you're the special snowflake, but for the most part, it is much harder to market literary. It's much harder to get a foothold. And so just choosing to write it because it feeds you is a really good reason. But thinking that you are the snowflake, power to you, but it seems like that would be a hard way to, get success.
Yeah, that's usually a mistake. So what would you say is the advice here for your average SPP listener in terms of genre fiction versus literary, and when you do each and how it should fit into your larger catalog and all that stuff?
I feel like people have to eat their broccoli first. Like, as much as that sucks, like that really is the solution. Just to, do your work, like write your genre stuff, build yourself a career, and then write the book that you want. Because if you do it the opposite way, and you try to get a foothold with literary, it's just going to be a lot harder to do. But it also depends on, how much of a hurry you're in.
If you enjoy a challenge, literary is just a fun intellectual exercise. I find that like writing fiction and writing nonfiction is a good back and forth. Like for me as a creator, sometimes it's just like, I'm writing the same number of words, but I get to write nonfiction for a while and kind of cleanse my palate and reset. Okay, great. And I think that genre fiction and literary is kind of the same thing because it uses a different quote unquote muscle. It's obviously not really a muscle, but it's I think that a lot of really good literary straddles the line between awesome and pretentious. And it just depends on who you are, who is reading that book that decides whether it's awesome or pretentious. I'm
going to pull this quote from Owen, right, in chat. And he says, okay, Axis, I bought it and read it. The writing was amazing. One thing that is guaranteed to make people anxious is uncertainty. I was always so uncertain while reading Axis. I was having bad dreams and overall anxious. Maybe it didn't get to others like that, but it took a couple of weeks after finishing before I realized that it was the writing. I wasn't needing the Prozac or anything, but I was off my laid-back style. And I think that that's exactly it. I think that if you're writing a
Thank you for that, by the way. I really love that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. If you're writing something literary, I think you have a better chance at affecting people. And one story or one show that I know that we're going to do at some point next year probably is a show on how fiction can change the world, like, you know, movement through change and through story. And I think that literary
shuttle.
Except for Space Shuttle. But I think that those you have those opportunities to say very significant things, and the half-life of a reader's experience with your book is just much longer, or at least has the potential to, because you're going deeper. You know, I think it's okay for a genre book to be shallow, because that's kind of the experience that a reader is looking for, and it's what you should offer to them. But if your story is shallow, and I don't mean shallow like negatively at all, like shallow stories can be really, really fun. And like Johnny was talking about Da Vinci Code, and often talks about Da Vinci Code, like it is a shallow experience, but it's also a hell of a lot of fun. I read that book in like 2 sittings, just tore through it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever read a book that fast.
Yeah, you know what else I read really, really, really fast? I think it's the only thing I've read as fast, or not faster than Da Vinci Code, was The Firm. Did you ever read The Firm? Like, that book reads itself.
I don't know that I did read it.
Yeah, it's just so fast. But anyway, you know,
it's got the Snoopy music in the movie.
It does?
Well, not literally, but if you pay attention, they always have kind of ambient music that just reminds you of Peanuts. Seriously, go watch The Firm and tell me I'm wrong.
Oh, wow, I got to do that. Yeah, so I like that.
It gives you access to, like, it gives you a chance to pull out all the different tools in your toolbox. Like, you know, it's like if you're a painter and you usually use the 3 primary colors, and you're like, ooh, I can use this color on this project, and I can use this color. One of my favorite literary books is House of Leaves, and if you've read House of Leaves, it's talk about a book that's a challenge. Like, you have to turn the book around, and there's like one word on several pages, and there's a whole story going on in the footnotes. But I've told this a few times. Talking about being affected by a book. I read I don't know what it was, if it was just the conflagration of circumstances and time of day and where I was in my life or something. But when I read the prologue to that book, so spoiler alert, actually it's not a spoiler for the book, but the narrator of that book is Johnny Truant. And so it's the story is there's a house, and this guy was collecting
in New Orleans. They call the Rising Sun.
Calls the Rising Sun. This guy, I think his name was Zampano, was collecting like documentation on the house, and then so he has a bunch of paperwork, and then Johnny Truant, who's just a guy who works in a tattoo shop, discovers the papers, and then it's him, like it's the story within a story within a story. It's like a puzzle story, and so the forward is by him, and it's all about like it's a flash forward to, I found this stuff, and he's like holed up in a room with like all the windows are taped over with newspaper or something, and he's got measuring tapes nailed to the floor in all the dimensions of the room, because he thinks that the room is changing size. And I read this, and the narrator is telling you, like, don't read this book. Like, this messed me up. I'm presenting it for you, but don't read it. And I seriously considered not reading the book. It was the weirdest thing. Like, I've never had a book affect me like that. I was like, I know this is fiction, and this is freaking me the fuck out. So
I can't read it because I'll be imagining you as the central character.
I read it after I adopted the moniker, and it was weird. I will say that. So anyway, so that's, and we try to do some of those additional things, not exactly that, obviously, in like Devil May Care and in Axis of Aaron. Like, we have an unreliable narrator in some books. We have complex timelines. I had timelines for Devil May Care that were like, I had to color code like where the different timelines
were.
That
got really complicated.
It was really complicated, but feeling like we pulled that off, like looking at the end of the book and feeling, between Sean and I, feeling like we pulled that book off, despite how complicated it was, is really satisfying. It's way more satisfying than finishing a genre book, because it's like, wow, that's really hard.
Yeah, and the thing about genre books is you really do have to write. It's not that you have to write dumb, but you can't get as complicated, because it will cost you. I mean, I think one book that we worked really hard on making that happen was Dead City, right? Where we had a very commercial concept, and we didn't want to overwhelm the reader with a lot of minutia. We wanted to have some mystery there. Not enough for Dave, but some mystery there, and kind of keep the reader going. But what's interesting about that book is, that's the book where we try to really balance commercial with literary, and not literary, but like keeping things tight and intelligent, and assuming that our reader was an intelligent person. And even there, so this was just from yesterday. We got a review on Dead City, and so far the reviews on Dead City have been great. They've been all 5 stars. It has all 5 stars except for this one review, which is 2 stars. And
oh, good. I didn't see this one.
Oh yeah, it's new. But basically, he talks about, like, there's too much thinking involved in the book. And he says the writing is fine, but I've been reading for pages upon pages. And then he goes in and he says, if peeling an orange takes me too damn long, I'm just going to toss it up and pop open a bag of immediately satisfying chips. So, like,
I want the mystery resolved in page 2.
Right. So, like, I love that. Right.
Just is not a reader for that book, unfortunately.
Yeah, he's not a reader for that book.
And that book does clip, is the funny thing. Like, at least a lot of the action in the beginning is very clippy, I thought.
Right. Well, that's the point. We, meaning Johnny and me, are never going to write a book that's going to satisfy that reader. Like, we're not capable of it, because we are an orange. We're not chips. But that's okay. It's knowing what kind of story that you want to tell. So that
orange flavored chips.
I think that sounds disgusting. Gross. But yeah, anyway.
All right. So that's our discussion of genre versus literary. If you are interested in Devil May Care, it is the work that I would say Sean and I, between the two of us, in the Realm and Sands universe, I believe it's the one we're most proud of. I don't know if you would agree with that, Sean. I am. I feel it's the best. I would put it that way. I feel it's the best book for sure.
I love this book. I can't wait to get it in print and hold it and read it again.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's a little bit of a mind fuck. It's got some intertwining narratives and where the timeline's going and that sort of thing.
It for sure has my favorite language of any book that we've produced in-house. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, so that's Devil May Care, not Devil May Cry, as Sean sometimes says.
I do like to call it that. Although I've officially broken the habit.
Devil May Care by Platt and Truant. If you want to check that, it should be out. It's on pre-order now if you're listening live, and it should be out by the time you hear this episode. And that's it. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.